Hello everybody and welcome back to a brand new video. Now today I wanted to have a look at the longest grinds in Oldschool Runescape and try to figure out which one is the longest. Now for this video, for most of the items, I'm assuming that you're doing it solo. The only exception is raids. Now I haven't included that many pets in this list because I'm sure they would take up the majority of the spots. And I've tried to mix in more iconic grinds versus totally random items that nobody really wants, although there are a few of those as well. Anyway guys, hope you enjoyed the video. Before we get started here, I would really appreciate it if you took the time to go ahead and subscribe to my channel, as well as go ahead and turn on the bell notification so you can get alerted the minute I upload. Alright guys, let's get started. Now obviously this is kind of under the assumption that you are either an Ironman or for some reason you are grinding out the kill count yourself. Mostly Ironmen do that, but you know what, anyone can do it, go nuts. Now I'd like to start off with one of the more iconic grinds in the game, and that is the Dragon Warhammer. Now the Dragon Warhammer isn't the longest grind in the game. It honestly may not even make the top 10, but I thought I would put it on here because it's kind of a nice baseline to have a look at. A lot more people have to do this grind. It's going to hit a lot closer to home for most people. Now the Dragon Warhammer is probably one of the most sought after items in the entire game. You need it for a ton of different bosses. You kind of need it for a lot of these other items that are further up on this list. And the Dragon Warhammer is probably one of the most required items that actually has a really long grind to it. The drop rate is 1 of the 5,000 from Lizardman Shaman. Now if you are using a cannon and a blowpipe, you can get maybe around 150 kills per hour, maybe less, maybe more. And that would mean you'd have a good chance of getting the drop at about the 30 hour to 35 hour mark. Just to clarify here, no, it's not guaranteed, but 30 to 35 hours would be pretty average, which is about a day and a half of playtime. Now next up here we have the Heavy Ballista. Now the Heavy Ballista is actually a surprisingly long grind for someone who's doing it as an Ironman. Now no, the Heavy Ballista isn't worth that much, and that is because it just doesn't have as many uses as some of these other items, but the amount of time it would take to get a Heavy Ballista on an Ironman is actually quite high, and that's because you need quite a few different items to assemble it. You need 4 different items and 4 different drops to get this. You need the Ballista limbs, the heavy frame, the Ballista spring, and the monkey tail. Now assuming that you were killing demonic gorillas, this could take you way longer than grinding out for all of your Zenite pieces. The monkey tail is a 1 out of 1500, the heavy frame is 1 out of 1500, and the Ballista spring and Ballista limbs are 1 out of 500, which actually makes this grind longer than the Dragon Warhammer. Now assuming that you're killing somewhere between 50 and 60 demonic gorillas per hour, this could take you 40 to 60 hours to complete. No, it's not a very useful item, so no one in the right mind is actually going to do it, but it's pretty interesting to think about. Okay, so next up here we have the new Nightmare boss. Now this boss is infamous for having extremely long grinds to complete it and having very rare drops. Now when this boss was originally released, the amount of time it would take you to get all of the drops from it was close to the amount of time it took to max an account. Now the drop chance has since been buffed, but still it is an extremely long grind, and the most time consuming item to get on here is one of the different orbs. Now the individual drop rate for an orb, assuming you're doing it solo, is 1 out of 1800, and assuming you're doing about 20-minute kills at the Nightmare, which is already pretty competitive, it would take you about 600 hours to get a specific orb or 200 hours to get any of the orbs, which means the grind to get any orb would be about 8.3 days. Now next up here we have an item from Raids 1, probably the most sought after item maybe in the entire game, and that is the Twisted Bow. Now the Twisted Bow is probably one of the most useful items in the entire game, however the grind for it can be so long and it's already prohibitively expensive that a lot of people will never be able to afford it or invest the time to get it as a drop. Now assuming that you're killing it solo and you're getting around 30,000 points per raid, more or less, it's going to take you about 1,000 raids to see a Twisted Bow. Now if you're doing solos, a pretty efficient time is around 25 minutes, which means the amount of time it would take to get a Twisted Bow on average is about 415 hours or 17.2 days. Now I want to make a distinction between this and, for example, the Nightmare. Now if we were looking for any item at that rarity level, which are the Elder Maul, Coda Insignia, and the Twisted Bow, the chance would be cut in a third. However, I think the Twisted Bow is kind of in a tier of its own, which is why I included that one separately. Now next up here we have kind of a unique item, and that is the Sinhaza Shroud tier 5. Now I mentioned this in my rarest item video. Now what's kind of unique about the Sinhaza Shroud is it's not obtained randomly, it's obtained after a certain amount of Theater of Blood kills. And of these Sinhaza Shrouds, the tier 5 takes the most amount of kills to obtain. that being 2,000 Theater of Blood kills. I'm pretty sure it took someone like 6 or 7 months to get that many. And as of today, there's still only about 400 people who have obtained this item, or at least are eligible to get it. Now, a Theater of Blood kill is going to vary. I'm going to put a baseline of around 25 minutes a kill, which means the total amount of time it would take to get the Sanhaza Shroud Tier 5 from 0 kills is about 833 hours, or 34.7 days. Now, next up here we have actually a pet, and this is something that kind of came up recently that I thought was really interesting. What I'm talking about is the omelet pet with the metamorphic dust. Now, ModLottie recently posted on Twitter that there has only been 403 metamorphic dust drops in Oldschool Runescape, which I thought was kind of crazy, as the drop rate's actually only 1 out of 400, but the content itself is just not that desirable to complete. The only way to get a metamorphic dust drop is by completing the Chambers of Xeric in challenge mode, and you also need to complete it in a certain amount of time, or else you don't get a roll on the drop table. Now, not that many people do the Chambers of Xeric challenge mode because it's just more difficult and the drops are not better. Now, on top of needing the metamorphic dust, you also need the pet, which on its own is already really rare. And as of a couple weeks ago, only 90 people in the entire game have the transmog for the Olm pet. Now, if someone right off the bat did 1700 challenge mode kills, you'd have a pretty good chance of having the dust and the pet, but that's not really realistic. Not many people are going to do that. Most likely they have a ton of Chambers of Xeric kills under their belt, and then they go ahead and do the challenge mode after. Which means on average, the grind to get the metamorphic dust is going to be about 266 hours, and the grind for the pet is going to be pretty close to 1,000. Which means in total, that's about a 40.6 day grind, and one that isn't that worth it because you were definitely reducing your profit per hour versus regular raids. Now, next up here, we have probably one of the longest grinds in the entire game, and it's one that's been around for a long time. Now, for a long time in Oldschool Runescape, the Corporal Beast was one of, if not the longest grind in the entire game, and that's because it's one of the strongest monsters in the entire game, and very time consuming to kill solo. That on top of the items that they drop being best in slot and extremely rare makes this one of the longest grinds in the entire game. Now I'm specifically talking about the Elysian Spirit Shield, which has a drop rate of around 1 in 4,000. Now, the meta way to kill the Corporal Beast solo, at least right now, is to slowly lower its defense with the Dragon Warhammer by teleporting back to your house, getting your special attack back, running back and specking it again until the defense levels are so low that you can just go ahead and kill it. Now, unfortunately, this is a very time-consuming process and can take anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes a kill. So if an Ironman is grinding for this, and let's say they get 4 kills an hour, it's going to take 1,024 hours to get the Elysian Spirit Shield drop, which is an insane amount of time. That's about 42.6 days. Now, the Elysian isn't as integral to get as some of these other items. It is nice, but it's not as much of a bottleneck as, for example, the Dragon Warhammer or even the Twisted Bow, but still an absolutely insane grind. Now, next up here, we have another item from the Chambers of Xeric challenge mode, and that is none other than the Xeric's Champion. Barely anybody has this item, and for good reason. The Chambers of Xeric challenge mode, as I stated earlier, isn't really worth doing, and I think even someone who is very proficient at it, it could still take about 40 minutes to do it as a duo. Now, in this circumstance, I'm not going to bother saying you're going to do it solo because there's no point. You just need to complete raids. There is no drop rate to be accounted for here. Now, to get the Xeric's Champion, you need to do 2,000 Chambers of Xeric challenge mode kills, which is ridiculous, and that would take you about 1,333 hours to get the cape, or 55 days. It would take you about half the time it takes to max an account just to get this one cosmetic item, which is completely ridiculous. Now, the second to last entry here is a pet, and none other than the Bloodhound pet. Now, this is by far the longest pet grind in the entire game. Most people don't bother even grinding it, they just get it by accident, but for the players that have grinded it out intentionally, it could take years sometimes. That is because it is a 1 in 1,000 drop from a Master Clue Scroll, which do take a long time to get. Now, I've kind of ballparked the amount of time per master at around 2 hours. It could be longer or shorter than that. I'm assuming that you're getting the easy, medium, and hard clues through Implings, and then you go ahead and get the elite clue from Sarachnis or something like that. Including the time to complete the master, maybe it's going to be 2 hours, could be a bit longer. If it's 2 hours per clue, it's going to take you 2,000 hours to get this. 3 hours per clue is going to take about 3,000 hours. I mean, it's pretty basic arithmetic here, which means on average it's going to take you probably at least 83 days, if not more. And finally here, coming in at number 1 is, of course, the Max Cape. The Max Cape is indeed an item, and it is one of the longest grinds in the entire game. No, maybe it's not the longest, but anything after that is kind of self-imposed or not that important. Now the quickest way to get a max cape is to just play a regular account, which is going to take you about 104 days. However, it scales up even further. If you're doing it on an Ultimate Ironman, it's going to take you about 5,000 hours, about twice as long, and that's going to be 208 days. Once again, ModLottie posted a new statistic showing us the quickest ever max per game mode. For a normal account, it was about 90 days, and for an Ultimate Ironman account, it's 206 days. So definitely one of the most deserved and prestigious achievements in the entire game. Anyway guys, that is going to be it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you think there's any longer grinds out there, let me know with a comment down below. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you next time.